Hello, here we are again, and it is time for episode 4. I am Moses. Of today's episode of Geek Talk MD.
Geek Talk!
Which is today. What's our topic today, Dave?
Today's topic is...
the number 4. No, I'm kidding. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,
No,
11,
that's not the
12.
topic.
Oh, no, that was Sesame Street, sorry. Or was that Electric Company? No, it was Sesame Street.
Today's topic is... fantasy in television and movies. Dun dun dun!
Fantasy. Well, I've had 1 or 2 fantasies. Or you want to talk about those?
That's a different podcast.
Okay, fine, yeah.
You can record that on your own and listen to it on your own.
Oh, I'm sure there are some people that would get into it.
Nope, you are wrong.
Hey.
Wrong.
Regardless of how sick it is,
wrong.
There are people that will get into it.
Wrong.
Anyway.
It's a fantasy that you think... It's a fantasy if you think people are really interested.
Okay, so how... we could get into a really big discussion in and of itself of what exactly defines fantasy.
That's true.
In terms of a literary or entertainment genre. And let's just say...
Well, I mean, it's... we all understand, or we all have a perception of what normal is, or what our norm is. And, I guess fantasy is just things that may exist in our norm, but are different. Very different.
Yes.
In a fantasy, some people... Well, this is one of the reasons why we thought it would be a good topic, because, for some people there's a perception of what fantasy automatically comes to mind when you say fantasy. But there are lots of other movies and TV shows that were out there that are still technically fantasy. And then a couple that we'll talk about that, is it fantasy or isn't it fantasy? I don't know. Let's talk about it. So, first let's take a look at some of the things what's first kind of thing that comes to mind when someone says, let's talk about fantasy.
That's easy. That is easy. Right off the bat, one of the first things that most people will say when you say fantasy, especially recently, is Lord of the Rings. The Rings.
Oh, yes.
Probably also put into that same category Conan, all the Conan the Barbarian storylines by Robert E. Howard.
I mean, if you're focusing on that, for example, that witch part, and the sacred arrow, and a lot of those. If you're focusing on those components, yes. Otherwise, it's kind of almost like what could have possibly happened back in the day. But if you're, in my opinion, if you're talking about some of that mystical components, then yeah.
Well, basically, what a lot of people would call sword and sorcery.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, then we can just take it, pretty much verbatim, and there are movies like Dragonheart. Dragonheart, dragon, sword, magic. I mean, it's got all the... Oh,
yes. And it has Sean Connery.
Well, that's true. You're saying Sean Connery is attached to fantasy? Your fantasy, maybe.
Plenty of people's fantasies. Apparently Mike Myers' fantasy. Oh, the guy that did Austin Powers.
Just his voice.
Hey, but he voiced one of the 2 main characters.
Yeah. Fair enough.
But so, he did do a B movie fantasy film. What was it called? Lord of the Valiant or something, where he plays the Green Knight.
Oh gosh. Actually, as you say, Green Knight with Connery, it does come to mind.
Yeah, but I barely really remember anything about it. Although I think the guy that played the hero in it also played Tarzan in that really horrible Bo Derek version in the 80s. But no, less said about that, better.
Yeah, let's move on. But I mean, these are things that come to mind when people say fantasy. I mean, you think about the sorcery, you think about dragons, of course, and knights, and armor, and stuff like that.
Yeah, and if you're going to mention Lord of the Rings, then you should talk about the movie that was spawned as an attempt to make Lord of the Rings, but when the person who tried to make the movie couldn't secure the rights, made a completely different movie, but with several references to that. Willow.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Yes. Well, that's actually a good one to mention, because in this particular case, you have for anyone who hasn't seen it, you don't have your stereotypical hero as such, being the main character.
No, not at all.
And for that, it was quite refreshing. I mean, it was, it's definitely a more family-oriented type film, although it gets a little bit dark coming closer to the end. But, it's got interesting characters, Val Kilmer, some big names in it.
One of his, actually, it's hard to say if there's, it's one of his, what I'd say one of his most interesting roles.
It is. Nothing to stretch for him.
No. But, I mean,
it was a good role for him.
When you consider that, if you want to talk about a stretch for him, go and watch Top Secret. But that's off topic.
Yeah, and also it wasn't a good movie.
It wasn't a good movie, but it had so many hilarious moments.
Well, okay. I mean, the thing about Willow is lighthearted. I wouldn't
very much so.
Classify it as comedy as such, but definitely it's fantasy.
Yeah, it's fantasy with a lighter touch than Lord of the Rings. And
well, yeah, it's definitely not that depth.
No,
it's not epic.
And if I remember correctly, George Lucas produced it, but Ron Howard directed it. Yes, okay. Richie Cunningham directed Willow.
That explains a lot. Didn't the what did they call themselves? Can't remember what Pecs. They called them. Other people called them Pecs.
They were called Pecs by the humans.
Yeah. But they had red hair, didn't they?
Well, the guy that played Willow had auburn reddish.
Actually, he's done quite a bit of stuff.
Oh yes, he has.
I saw him in. He didn't have an active role, but he was in the relatively new first edition of Star Wars, where when going off topic because we're talking sci-fi here, but anyway, he was one of the people in the audience in attendance to the racetrack scene.
Well, he was also actually Wicket the Ewok.
Oh, was he?
Yes, he was.
Oh, okay, there we go.
And he was
all that makeup.
He's also in the horror films Leprechaun. He is the titular Leprechaun. Oh, okay. And if we're going to kind of touch briefly on fantasy, might as well mention that he was also little Professor Flitwick in your one of your most hated movie series, Harry Potter. Harry Potter.
I took it out of my mind already. Void.
But yeah, I mean, I'd have to say that's a movie that I really, really enjoyed when it first came out, and it does bear rewatching from time to time. But it's but the one thing that in terms of fantasy right now that really has been grabbing my attention has been Game of Thrones.
Oh, not just yours. I mean, it's one of those things has really caught on for a lot of people. And, I hear people talking about Game of Thrones that you wouldn't necessarily say are into sci-fi fantasy, but it's been one of those bridges that have come along. I'll hand it to Harry Potter in the fact that it was an enabler to allow what people that don't generally follow sci-fi fantasy, for whatever reason, the writing quality of the books and so forth made it acceptable to read the books and talk about it publicly.
And that's very important right there. I'd have to say anything that encourages kids to read, regardless of whether you think it's direct or not, if it encourages kids to read, great.
Well, actually, let me take a step back from that and say that absolutely you're right in the fact that anything that helps kids and inspires kids to read is a plus. But, I haven't said many things about Harry Potter because I didn't like it. But with regards to the fact that, however she wrote it, she attracted women. And it was okay for women to read it. It became part of book clubs. Mm-hmm. It became part of the mainstream for adults to read fantasy. Mm-hmm. And when kids see that, they view it as acceptable. And this is a big gap. Because kids will read or be forced to read or whatever it is, they'll read because of, bedtime or whatever.
Yeah, but they don't necessarily like it.
Well, I mean,
if they're forced to,
depending on the age. I mean, some of them, will like it and may pick it up, and some of them do or don't. But what I'm saying is that the fact that they saw their parents reading this fantasy book and talking about it positively, and then of course eventually afterwards. But that is a better thing, because it now becomes acceptable in the kids' eyes that parents are reading fantasy and can talk about fantasy openly.
Yes.
Which is a big bridge, based on what we talked about before.
But having said that, about making things accessible to kids, you got to say Game of Thrones is not.
Oh, for kids? No.
No.
But it's doing the same thing in that, people that may not have necessarily perceived them as, fantasy watchers, are watching Game of Thrones, are talking about it, are looking forward to it. I've even partaken in a Game of Thrones season 5 first episode evening.
Get out,
friends. Yes, I have.
And you didn't invite me.
Oh, I was invited.
Uh-huh.
But the thing is that this is now becoming acceptable for it. Now, I have to admit, I haven't been overly fond of this particular season that has just passed this season 5. But that is primarily because I didn't necessarily like the way it started. I felt that in season 5, unlike other seasons, the starting of the first episode usually came in a bang, and often there were little bangs as it went along and then ended in a bang. In this particular case, I didn't find it's really started off in a bang. I thought it was just really a continuation from before, with large gaps in the story for all the different pieces of story.
Previously on.
Well, honestly, if there was no season finale, I could have just accidentally lumped this up with season 4.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Now, granted, I'm not going to be a spoiler for it, but it definitely had its moments through the series, as the episodes went on, and then a big bang in the end, which most people already know about, but I won't mention. But the thing is that it's one of those things that aside from the controversy and the violence and the characters not surviving, and
especially if it's a character that you actually like, guaranteed that character's going to die.
Well, but the thing is it's not like they wrote them so that you will like them for the purposes of them dying. It's like
no. I've actually come across interviews with George R.R. Martin where he's actually said that. Where he's actually said, "Oh, you like that character? Oh, he's dying next."
Yeah, but the thing is, everybody's dropping at one point. There's only one or two, or
the slogan of the series, Valar Morghulis, in the language of the series, actually translates to "All men die."
Well, there you go. Well, that's not true, because that guy's mother died too.
Okay, details.
But
hey, I'm still convinced, because everybody keeps saying, a Stark must sit on the Iron Throne. I'm still convinced that at some point Robbie Jr. as Tony Stark's going to sit down on the damn thing.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm sure you will see it on YouTube, but I'm confident that we will not see it in the show.
I would also like to point out, for anybody that hasn't seen the series yet, I'm not going to say what's the matter with you. Dave,
what's the matter with you?
Okay, Dave said it this time. But I will warn you right now, if you are an animal lover, be aware right now, bad things happen to animals in large quantities, even more so than to human beings in this series, especially horses. Guaranteed, once a season, something incredibly violent and horrible happens to a horse.
Yeah, but you know what? There's a lot of violence that goes on. It's not, for the amount of violence that does go on, there are some gore components to it. But
without question.
But there are a lot of shows that aren't meant to be gory that are. And here's a show that could be gory but isn't. It could be a lot worse than what it really is.
Oh, it could. You could go the slash and gash route, and there have been occasions where it's bordered on it, like that one duel in the one episode. I'm not going to spoil it, but the end of that duel is of such a level of gore that. My goodness. Even myself and my girlfriend were both like sitting there going, "Whoa!"
Well, yeah. There was that big what's it called, the Red Wedding? Is that the name?
Yeah, that was also.
So that pretty much says it all right there.
Yeah, but that wasn't an incredible amount of gore by comparison
to what it could have been.
Yeah, but it was more. But it was definitely shock value.
Yeah,
definitely.
For sure. Well, as well. Again, for if you haven't seen it, it's surprising just the way that it played out.
Yes.
If you're following it and you haven't really, heard the spoilers and heard people talking about episodes, and you're legitimately watching it from beginning to end. It's one of those moments, and there are moments that will surprise you, and oh, I see this coming, but then it takes it further.
Yeah. And there are moments when things happen that you absolutely do not expect. And when it does happen, you're just like, wow, I did not see that. It's just like backhands you from around a corner. I'd also like to point out that it very much like Willow, one of the heroes of the story actually said that you would never expect to be a hero. A dwarf. Tyrion Lannister, played by Peter Dinklage, who is actually, I'd have to say, the actor who's really shining in this series.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was by design or not.
I don't know either, but
I think that there was definitely a likability to him early on because of his lechery, and but that evolves. And I think that evolution was important at that time in the story.
Well, I'd say it's more a case of like how the character's written is great, but more than anything else, it's the actor's performance, what he's done with it. This guy has got some incredible acting chops, and he's got charisma, bags of it.
Yeah, I have to say I wasn't overly fond with that whole fighting scene and him outside the wall component of it, because not just because it's out of his element. I just didn't like the way the whole thing played out. But for him and in his moments, in his environment, he's very good. And when he's talking himself into safety, he does it in such a way that it feels organic. As opposed to it just being scripted, that he just happens to say the perfect thing at the perfect time and things just fall into place. The way he delivers it, it really feels organic.
It's a definite A, then B, then C.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of respects, I'd have to say that if you watch his character and then watch his father's character, Tywin Lannister, you can definitely see where he's gotten his analytical and logical mind. And speak Tywin Lannister, Charles Dance, one of the best and underrated British actors I've ever seen.
Sweet brother looms.
Oh yeah, we're going to get back to that later on. But yes, he is. I mean, he's been in. It was in Golden Child. He was in Alien 3. He's one of the greats. One of the greats.
But you know what? I have to say that he doesn't really, in my opinion, he doesn't. He feels like he has more in him than what we are seeing. Meaning that I feel his characters are kind of the same, different genres and so forth. But for the most part, for me, they feel kind of the same.
Yeah, I can see he does seem to get typecast. Yeah. Although in Alien 3 he's not that type of character. Yeah. But very often he does seem to get typecast as the sinister type of guy. But let's face it, he looks sinister. Like he seems to be cut from the same cloth as guys like Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, and Tim Curry,
Oh yeah.
But just. I mean, I think the scene where he's first introduced, he's talking to his other son, Jaime Lannister, and while he's lecturing him, he's butchering a stag.
Yeah, I remember that.
And like you can't help but concentrate. Not only like his voice makes you concentrate on what he's saying, but the way he's acting out the actions of butchering the stag, you can't help but pay attention to how he's doing that. I mean, he was just a wonderful bit of acting there.
Well, I mean, he definitely, like some of the other characters, he definitely felt like a father figure. Now, whether or not you agreed with his parenting and whatnot, that's not what I'm talking about. But he definitely felt like he was an old time. He was a father of older children, plus years of experience in war and governing and so forth. You felt his experience, he was, especially in that scene.
He was definitely a spare the rod, spoil the child type of father.
Sure.
Yeah. I'd also have to say that for a TV series, like Game of Thrones seems to be doing something that I never would have expected from a TV series, which is actually putting like production value. I mean, you see every penny on the screen.
Yeah.
I mean, the special effects, the costume, the choreography.
Yes, I would say
everything
specifically
about
for that costume component.
everything about this series. I mean, I could put it up against some of the biggest budget movies out there right now, and and say, you know what, pound for pound, equal.
Well, but you know what? They have these tours where they go around with outfits and they show off not all, but a lot of the movie or the TV show props and whatnot. And there was one in Toronto, and they're free. You just have to line up, and the line up could be long.
Oh yeah.
But I had gone with some friends of ours, and we went to go see the exhibit. And again, to what you're saying, you really don't have an appreciation till you're literally right in front of some of these outfits and the level of detail to them, to the point where you could never have appreciated that on television. And so why would they bother doing it? And it's simply because of the quality of work. I mean, even to the details of some of the baby dragons, for example.
Oh yes.
I mean, most of it is getting computer animated anyway, and most of it you're not going to see up close anyway. But still, they went to the trouble of giving them levels of detail that obviously is just for love of the work. It's for no other reason. It can't really be for any other purpose.
Actually, an interesting aside. I came across an interview with the young lady that plays Arya Stark on the series, and she was commenting that for 2 whole seasons, for 2 years, she was basically walking around in the exact same clothes day after day after day, with progressively more dirt and mud and blood being caked on the outfit for 2 bloody years. and the thing was, she was getting older in her teens, so she was constantly having these growth spurts, so they had to just keep, and it was far easier to just keep adjusting the costume than making a new costume and making it look just like the old one, with the same dirt stains and everything.
I can believe it. Because like I said, they had a lot of the weapons and the clothing and the cloaks and the so forth there for display, and they're just amazing to look at. Really amazing. I
mean, every performance is just wonderful. The name escapes me, but the actress that plays the female warrior, Brienne of Tarth, just blows my mind as well.
A lot of people say that, but she doesn't really do much for me.
Really?
I don't know. Outside of the fact that she's freakishly tall. I don't find much from the acting. I appreciate the character's loyalty to a fault, but she really her whole storyline is lost to me now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. If she wasn't there since the moment that the mother charged her for her duties. If she didn't show up again, it wouldn't matter to me one way or the other.
Yeah. And what do you think of the Mountain?
Yeah, I like the character. Again, he's it's kind of hard to judge whether or not they want him to be a main character or not, because they don't give him much to work with.
No, and it's been 3 different actors already. Well,
but it's he needs to be there, because of his brother. But
from
a character perspective,
I'm not going to. If I comment on this, I'm going to spoil something, so we'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Okay, but the point being is that I don't really know. Maybe they don't know where they're going with the character, but when he shows up, he takes up a lot of scenery for someone who we're not sure if he's a main character or not. But anyway, that Game of Thrones, love it. My friends love it. It was something that we were watching earlier on, and now we just wrapped up season 5, so in a big way.
Oh yes.
So once again, they've left us hanging until season 6.
Yeah. And
but again, these are things. Let's come back around to it. When people say fantasy, I feel these are the kind of things that people think about, right off the top of their head, right? But you could also look at it from a different side of point of view.
Oh, yes.
You know, for movies or TV shows like Hercules.
Which actually for anybody that doesn't know, and I'm surprised if anybody
Or
doesn't know.
Heracles.
Yeah, Heracles is the original name in Greek. Hercules is the Roman name. It was actually a myth, and I mean this goes back to ancient times of a demigod with in superhuman strength. Although depending on which the Roman or the Greek version, his intelligence seems to vary.
Well, just to take a step back, and again, for if anyone out there listening doesn't know what a demigod is, basically it's an offspring of a god.
A god that got horny
mythology.
and screwed a human and then you got a half god. In this case,
exactly.
And in the case of Zeus, this happened a lot.
Hence, making up the majority of the stories of the Greeks.
He raped women disguised as a swan, disguised as a bull, disguised as, I kid you not, a golden shower.
Yeah.
Seriously, the Greeks were messed up.
Yeah. Well, you know what? That's true.
No offense to modern Greeks. I'm stressing ancient Greeks. These ancient Greeks. I mean, people can say the Romans were really screwed up with their orgies. I'm sorry. If you're the king of your gods, basically disguised himself as I repeat, golden shower to rape a woman. Come on. Seriously? Okay.
Let's get back onto the topic.
Yes,
so
I'm sorry.
We're talking about
Hercules. Yes.
In this particular case, we're talking about the merger of mythology, be it Greek or Roman or Norse,
or
which
Egyptian.
is very common.
Yeah.
Go Thor or Egyptian. These are all different types of mythology that have existed through the years. Whether or not they're true or not, that's a different thing. I'm not going to get into it, but they have all translated into various movies over the centuries.
Could you think of a good Norse?
Well, Thor. I mean, right off the bat, it's the most common thing in the market today.
Yeah.
Okay, you can't argue with that.
No. But once we get into Thor, I mean, the way that they've presented it in the Marvel movies, it's
a Marvel Thor.
They're bleeding it into sci-fi sort of.
Well, yeah, that's true. But I mean,
wasn't 13th Warrior? That was Vikings, wasn't it?
That was Vikings. Yes, it was Vikings, and yes, there was a fantasy component there too.
Yeah.
Whether or not you liked Antonio Banderas in the role of the 13th Warrior, I like the character. I don't necessarily like him in it, but I like that character. I can't say I love the movie though, because it felt like I was being led around by my nose. There's something over here. Oh, there's over there. Oh, there's something over there. I felt led around through
To be perfectly honest, it's one of those movies where I hate to admit it because I usually don't do this, but there have been a few where 10 minutes into the movie I got so bored that I fell asleep.
Oh man!
And I've never tried to watch it again.
Well, you know what? I hate to say it, but I kind of agree with you.
and if we're gonna go into the subject of fantasy films that I just thought were absolute crap that I've actually got the DVD sitting on my shelf and I've yet to even break the cellophane off of it because
13th Warrior?
No, not 13th Warrior, but Reign of Fire.
Oh, Reign of Fire, yes, Reign of Fire. Again, this is kind of why we're touching on some of these things, because Reign of Fire is for anyone who hasn't seen it, is a post-apocalyptic event, but the event isn't the stereotypical man killing man, which is almost always what it evolves to, or aliens killing man. But in this case, man discovers a dragon, or a dragon egg, I can't remember, and the dragon grows, and slowly the dragons start populating, and what are they going to eat? Well, us, because we're easy to eat. And so
too many bones.
So basically, Reign of Fire
and grannies
is
two streak on your teeth.
Yeah, well, I don't think that really mattered. I think they were eating that. So basically, it's humans trying to survive. What humans are trying to survive against the Reign of Fire that comes down from the dragons when they scorch everybody before they eat them.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to remember from a cover of a fantasy magazine years and years ago, and there was this really amazing illustration on this cover of the view from a fighter jet cockpit.
Okay.
And it's basically, a fighter jet taking on a dragon.
Okay.
And that's one of those ideas that really used to catch my imagination.
Actually, are you talking like a biplane?
No, a fighter jet, like an F-16.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because back in the day, I drew a picture of a biplane flying around, and there were angels and dragons fighting.
Ooh, cool.
But anyhow, the Reign of Fire, as is post-apocalyptic, it doesn't really feel like a fantasy movie.
Yeah.
It may even border a little bit on sci-fi, except for the fact that there is no
Specific subject, I think, in the next episode, though.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I would still classify this as fantasy because it does still incorporate the dragon, and
yeah, that's the main thrust of the story is the dragons. So,
and the dragon's taking over in this case.
I'd also, in terms of fantasy, far better known a book series by the late great Sir Terry Pratchett was the Discworld series, which is basically very quickly. Basically, I'd describe it as Lord of the Rings if it had been written by Monty Python.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a couple of them, and we've talked a little bit about Discworld. I'm sort of bittersweet on as a concept. I liked some of the stories, and again, if you are a fan of British comedy humor, their art style, there are some very nice components within the storyline, and it's got a high production value. I was surprised, on
the books are. Another fantasy film that I'd like to mention, but that it doesn't adhere to the usual fantasy concept, but I think you'd agree with me that it's still, even though it doesn't fit the actual fantasy generality, I would say it is still a fantasy film. Is A Night at the Museum.
Okay, I can kind of see that. I mean, being the day, it is still like let's say it didn't really happen, and people it happened, it would seem like he's having a fantasy, he's having a daydream, he's having visions of animals or creatures coming to life.
But even this happened, everything about it is fantastical. It's magic. It's it's stuff from a bygone era or an era. It's like the recorded history when the oceans drank Atlantis, sort of thing.
True.
Yeah, it's that kind of a feel. Let me tell you of the days of high adventure.
Yeah. No, that you are right, and you're right. It does feel, it does have that dare to dream, dare to imagine, type of feeling. And as you say that, and actually another thing just quickly popped into mind, probably because of Robin Williams, was Jumanji.
Yes, that's right.
Again, it's a board game. The premise is not fantasy, but what happens
because everything about it is magic.
It's magic.
Yeah.
It's all magic. So. It sort of popped into mind.
Robin Williams.
The late great. But, it sort of popped into mind. But, as we're saying, still talking about the fantasy and Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about Depp in one of the other episodes. But, I mean, with regards to fantasy, it's still a fantastic story.
And the character, aside from all the fantastical aspects of it, just what Johnny Depp did with the character of Captain Jack Sparrow was so over the top, so unexpected, that it just completely rewrote everybody's expectation of a pirate.
Well, to be honest, I don't disagree with that statement, but the thing is that he did such a good job, it actually muddied the waters for me. You forget, what am I actually here to watch? Am I here to watch the story? Am I here to watch the pirates? Am I here to watch him?
Yeah, and most people now go to either watch him or to watch Jeffrey Rush as Captain Barbossa.
Which, honestly, I don't generally like.
But he plays a pirate
guy.
straight.
He does a really good job as playing a bad guy that isn't necessarily 100% always bad.
But he does pretty much play the quintessential pirate, complete with constantly going, "Arr!"
True. And you know what? It is a good series of movies, I have to say. I mean, they evolved fairly well. The story kept going fairly well. In my opinion, was a little bit getting redundant, but it still, as far as I'm concerned, I agree. It still falls into a fantasy concept because high seas adventures.
Oh yes.
Back to it's like
and
the old
magic.
Sinbad, like the old Sinbad days.
Oh yes, the old Sinbad.
You can't argue fantasy.
with all the Ray Harryhausen special effects, the stop motion, the skeleton warriors, the Cyclops.
The Cyclops. You gotta say the Cyclops.
Wow.
It's all about the Cyclops.
Oh my God.
So,
the skeleton pirates from Pirates of the Caribbean was so obvious warriors from the Harryhausen stuff.
I wouldn't necessarily
from like Sinbad or Clash of the Titans, and
yes. And again, it was cutting edge stuff back then.
Oh yes. The first time you see the pirates suddenly become skeletal, or even better, the time when Barbossa says, "Gentlemen, take a walk."
Which you would think was intuitively obvious, but obviously it wasn't, because no one's really ever done it.
But it just looks so magnificent.
Bottom and
yeah. The only thing I'd have to say is by the time you got to the fourth film, I mean, I remember taking to see that movie. They were saying, "So who's this Blackbeard character that's in this movie?" And I said, "Oh, wait, because anybody who's actually the story. Wait until you get the part where you see how he dies. It's going to blow you away. It is so badass." And they're waiting for it, and they don't use that. They use something else that was completely fantasy, involving the Fountain of Youth, had nothing to do with the originals, with what really happened to Captain Blackbeard.
Yeah.
And they were obviously, because I'd set them up for this, this most...
You spoiled it!
And the most badass death on the planet. I mean, this guy... an entire army barely was able to take him down before he died. Read up on it. Read up on Blackbeard. Just how he died alone will have you going, whoa. And the way they did it what they did in the movie had no relation to it whatsoever. It was terrible. I was just so disappointed. I walked out of that, even though there were other things in the movie that were just so great. By the time that scene happened, I just was. Yeah, you just ruined everything for me.
Yeah, I think you burnt your own bubble.
Yeah.
I think you're
you go in with expectations, and
big mistake.
Which leads us to another fantasy property, Avatar: The Last Airbender, because the cartoon was just unbelievably good, and so when M. Night I never could get his name right.
Shyamalan?
Yeah, what the fuck?
Yeah.
But when everybody had such great expectations because Avatar is such an amazing story, and he's supposed to be this amazing visionary director with huge leanings towards the Rod Serling, and the movie was shit.
Well, I don't think it was shite.
I think it was
a single movie to surmise the entire book of The Element. I think it was lofty attempt that I would have liked to have seen them carry through and finish off the rest of the book and get that spot. The Avatar was very good. The only thing that I hated was the fact that they didn't the comic relief from that brother. That
or the uncle.
Yeah, I agree. That the uncle component was important, but it was even with the TV series where you've got all the different episodes that you can work in all the extra character growth. But in a movie where you have to get everything wrapped up in 2,
they were horribly constrained by trying to fit 2 hours.
Exactly that.
But I would point out,
because I think that if you if you didn't see the TV animated series, which I don't think it's the only version of it, but that's the one that comes to mind for me. And
that is
if If you didn't see that, then if you want to know what it was about, again, the movie I think it captures what it's about without a lot of the particular components, or like for example how the animated version dealt with that final scene and he makes into that giant water monster. I like what they did in the movie better, to be honest. So
okay.
I didn't like that thing. I didn't like that
water monster.
Yeah. Ridiculousness. I liked what they did there, and I liked the way that they ended it there.
Okay.
Lots of stuff. I agree that there are lots of stuff that were missed, but again, I think it's primarily due to trying to get too much because it was big. I mean, for an animated series, the characters were very involved. The characters were very good. There were lots of other secondary characters that are relevant or should be relevant that obviously they couldn't get into.
And there was a lot more time for character development, a lot more time for growth of the characters. But, even the creators of the series were so disappointed ended up with the movie that they even did an episode in the final season just mocking the movie.
Yeah, well, like I said, I don't go into movies with much expectations, and I did enjoy the animated series, my son as well.
Oh really? You don't go into movies with expectations. Let's push on to the next property then.
Okay.
Highlander.
Okay.
which
I
was...
I didn't even know about Highlander. when I
Yes,
was
but
watching
got to
it.
Highlander 2.
Yeah, with Van Peebles.
No, that was 3.
If
You
you
see-
want, again, we're still talking about fantasy, but that's
Yeah,
fine.
you see,
Carry on.
you see, folks,
Carry on with your
Dave had
fantasy.
such massive expectations of Highlander 2, The Quickening, or as I call it, The Slow and Painful, that
You know what? Again, you're going on about your fantasy here because
That
I
he
didn't go in
refuses to
I
admit
didn't
that
go
the
into
film
any
even
movie
happened.
with expectations.
He re-
The only difference being is that if a movie is shite, it's shite. And so if
Yes,
I
and
have
that-
to watch a movie
and I
like
will-
King of the Kickboxers that is absolutely shite, then I will say it's absolutely shite.
And
But
Highlander
I did
2
not necessarily go into it with any expectations.
Yes.
I simply said I saw it and it was shite.
Highlander 2 was overall, aside from a couple of scenes where Sean Connery shines, the movie was shite.
So that is that.
But going back to the original director's cut of Highlander,
Yes, and again, now we're talking to stuff that may not necessarily be as obvious. Like when someone says, "Oh, let's watch this fantasy flick," it's called Highlander. Technically, it is. It more so than some others because there is a large magic component to it.
it is
Living
sword and
forever.
sorcery. It is sword and sorcery, period.
It is sword and
It's
sorcery.
just set in modern times.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So again, it's definitely not one of those things that it's more than not just obvious. Some people would contest that whether or not it's fantasy or not, but it is purely. And also, we've touched a little bit on it with
In episode 1.
sorry,
In episode 1. No, episode 2. Episode 2. My apologies.
of
Highlander.
I don't know. What
We touched on that in episode 2 a bit.
in episode 2.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah. But
See, you're throwing me around now.
yes, into the turnbuckles, just like at the beginning of Highlander in the wrexling match at Madison Square Garden between the Tonga Kid jumping Jim Brunzell and Greg Gagne against the Fabulous. I remembered.
Well, here's something that has nothing to do with wrestling, but we did touch on the martial arts component of it. But again, something that you may not necessarily think is fantasy right off the top of your head, but we just touched on it, was Dear Sweet Brother Lumsi.
My dear sweet brother Numsi forgives me. Thank you. Yes, Eddie Murphy in The Golden Child with, again, the great Charles Dance as the villain, Thaddeus Numspa.
And he was good.
Oh, he was wonderful. And Eddie, I mean, I think that the only thing that held that movie back was that everybody was expecting another Beverly Hills Cop.
Well, you know what? I agree with what you're saying because Eddie Murphy was in there, but I'll tell you that I felt that it was very much like a Last Action Hero. Because
Ouch.
he was in there too, and the roles are pretty similar.
Ouch. Yeah, that's right. He was in that too, wasn't he?
But I did
Charles
like
Dance, not Eddie Murphy.
Yes. But I did like the concept of the Golden Child. Touching on the Buddhist belief that their priests come back in another life, and many times there's these young kids or babies that get put onto pills, saying that they are the reincarnation of such and such.
Which is also one of the central points of the Avatar series.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's still it's still touching back on the Oriental belief structure. So you're right. The Golden Child is the reincarnation of, and again, you can't argue with the fact that this is a fantasy component, not just because it touches on religion, but also just there's magic, and there may not. I don't remember if there was sword fighting and such, but there was definitely the ancient lore and the temples and give me the knife, touching on the old beliefs.
I should point out there's another movie that we should include on in that list then. Practically exactly along the same lines, and a far more successful film.
Which one?
Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah. I used to love that movie.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to find, but
it is a masterpiece, isn't it?
It's one of those things, it is everything. Everything good you want to say about movies and everything bad you want to say about movies is all in this movie.
Yep. And actually, have you heard the news about the remake? They actually want to do a remake with And this is the part that kind of, I mean, although I like the actor, I think he's all wrong for the part. They want to get The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, to play the Kurt Russell part of... Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That's good. They have to find a new trucker type person for it.
Yeah.
Specifically for this role, because you need to have that redneckness.
Yeah, and he's supposed to be obviously inept. And I just don't think that
the
Rock. I don't think The Rock is right for that part, but I'm willing to give him a chance.
I'm not. I mean, I like him as an actor, and I like some of the stuff that he's done, but at least he's legitimate in what he does. I mean, he doesn't give any excuses or whatnot. It is what it is. I'm doing it, and it's good or it's not or whatever. It doesn't matter. And he's done quite a variety of different things, despite the typical typecast that people like him get into.
Yeah.
He's done quite a variety of things, including the Tooth Fairy, which I would also say is fantasy, but.
I never even saw that. Was it actually?
You don't need to see that part of it, but
so it was
never
bad,
erase it. You can never take that out of your memory. But it actually was a pretty good movie, all in all.
Really?
I thought so.
Okay.
Again, if you can bring yourself down back into your inner child and watch the movie with legitimate eyes and just take it for what it is, I thought it was a good movie.
I don't know. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't seen the movie, but I seem to recall from the promotional material that he actually plays a hockey player.
He is a hockey player. That's why he's called the Tooth Fairy, because he hits people so hard.
Yeah, but I mean, The Rock as a hockey player?
No, you can.
I don't see it.
No, you can see it because hockey players are big. If you go head to head with some of
massive. I mean, it's much like just watching wrestlers on TV. Until you've seen them face to face in real life, you have no idea how massive some of these guys are.
Well, exactly. And so that being said, he fits the role of a hockey player. He does.
Okay. Okay.
But it's the other side of it that it's a little harder to grasp. But again, if you're not looking at it to make it into a classic, which it won't be, it actually has quite a few good components to it.
Yeah, Julie
and
Andrews
Mary Poppins.
Yeah,
that's right, and Mary Poppins is in it. So how bad can it be?
Well, now that she's lost her singing voice, very.
Well, yeah, but this isn't a singing room for her.
Yeah. Okay, but is there any other thing that you could, off the top of your head, that you'd say isn't very obviously a
that is fantasy,
but isn't obviously fantasy, but would be fantasy?
Absolutely. I was thinking about this as well. National Treasure. There, I said it. I threw it out there. Jump on it.
Actually, no, I'm not going to jump. I don't have a problem with that idea. It is. I mean, it wasn't a great movie.
I loved it.
It wasn't a bad movie, but it wasn't great. And it also, I mean, many aspects of it were very fantastical, but not in the sword and sorcery sense. Especially when you consider that really it wasn't that violent an action movie.
You know what? Whether or not you liked it or not, when I was younger and I saw Raiders of the Ark for the very first time,
Raiders of the Lost Ark,
I had a feeling of anxiety in certain components, of excitement. I felt like I was learning something at some point, whether or not it was true or not at some point.
Yeah, practically everything they talk about that's supposed to be historical in that movie is bullshit.
Well, yeah, but I mean, let me come back around to that, because that brought up something else. But
okay, but please.
The thing was, I had that feeling when I watched National Treasure again, that here is something that's sitting in front of us. Could it be? I don't know. It doesn't have to be true, but it's enough to make you say,
Yeah, I do enjoy those kinds of ideas, but in some cases they just take it so over the top that just theory that met.
Yeah, but I mean that thing, like,
I'm talking Family Guy 30-second long vomit scene.
I thought you were going to say the Monty Python vomit scene, but
no.
But the thing is that,
and I timed it. It was exactly 30 seconds long when Brian vomits.
Okay, well, I'll take your word for it, because I believe that you had actually timed it. But these types of things, they've gotten a huge spotlight recently, and the reality is that yes, they are trying to touch on things that could or could not be true, possibly are true, possibly are not. But again, because you and I and most people know a lot of the components in here are not true, therefore they are fiction. Right? They're fantasy ideas, and that people have thought up, have connected the dots, and said, okay, well, if we did this and we did that, then this might seem to be true. And so, there you are. And so I would still classify that as a fantasy-based, adventure story that delved primarily with facts and wasn't overly violent. Oh, I mean, there's a lot of action, but overly violent. And, to reiterate that, something that's very popular out there, the books are very popular and the movies are still very popular, is the Da Vinci Code.
Speaking of vomit.
Oh, please.
There just isn't enough vomit in the world for that.
Please, if you left it all up to you, then it would all be Monty Python.
Get the bucket for Monsieur.
But I like Da Vinci Code. Now, I didn't read the book, except other people have this big issue with the variances between the books and the movie. But again, if you're watching the movie onto itself, there's a nice story in there. And again, as I say, the best lie has a grain of truth in it.
Yeah.
And there's more than enough pieces in there that touch on sore spots in people's beliefs and idealisms, and makes you say, is that true? I don't know.
For me, that movie is a quintessential example of you take so many excellent elements, like a director of the caliber of Ron Howard, an actor of the caliber of Tom Hanks, another actor of the caliber of
I'm not sold that he was best for this role,
Sir Ian McKellen, yes. And the French guy Jean Reno.
Yes,
who's I could watch him in any movie. And you got this great director and these great actors, and the movie sucked anyway.
No,
as far as I'm concerned, you
are wrong. You are wrong.
It sucked so hard that it would have satisfied Liam Neeson.
It's once again tainted glasses. Some people wear rose-colored glasses. You have green-colored glasses because absolutely.
I do not. I liked Batman.
Oh, please.
See.
Yeah, I have to laugh for.
Okay, we should probably wrap up. So, it's time. Yeah, no talk back from you. Actually, okay, we do have one question from a listener that asked Dave if you'd expand on what a LARP is.
Okay. All right, so I don't remember what episode that was, but
Step Back.
Was it? It feels so long ago.
Oh, yeah.
So I think what the point is that, I was trying to distinguish the difference between LARPing and live-action role-playing. And the acronym for LARP is live-action role-playing. But the difference that I was trying... Live-action role-playing first started, I was focusing on how it started and what it evolved to when it was forced to be underground. And things that happened and stories of things that have happened and a lot of the negative things that it got associated with role playing and D&D and so forth all got attached to all these negative things that were happening when it was private people or college or university students doing it underground and so forth. Now, that evolved into, of course, LARPing, which is the same acronym, live action role playing. But what I was talking about now is that now it's become much more accepted in a community sense, where there are rules and regulations, and I was saying that it's more open-handed, that things are more obvious and done on above board type of thing. There are organized events. There's organized places for them to happen.
Sorry, forgive me for interrupting, but I just remembered there is actually on the topic of fantasy films and LARPing, oddly enough, and also there's a movie, I don't know if you've seen it yet, but I would recommend for anybody, if they want to have a good laugh and get a good idea of what LARPing is, there's a movie called Knights of Badassdom, and it stars...
You said this before.
Yes, and it stars Peter Dinklage from Game of Thrones.
You said that before.
Have I?
You did!
Okay.
You senile little bastard.
Yeah, go get me my teeth.
Exactly this
get me my teeth and my cane, and I'll show you who's an old bastard.
I think you even mentioned this in the first episode.
Okay, fine, but definitely see it.
See, now you better write this down.
Oh God! Get me my meds. Get me my meds.
I don't think there's enough meds for you.
Okay.
So, actually, and there was one other comment from one of the people listening, and he just wanted to clarify that I had mentioned the Ottawa Curling Club for where Can Games was being held, and honestly, it was just a brain fart. The actual name of the place is the...
Yes, they happen more often in your old age, Dave.
Yeah, well, which, the farting or the...
Brain farting. Brain farts.
It's actually the Rudo Curling Club. That's the actual name of the curling club.
Actually, if truth be told, Dave, throughout his entire life, everyone has said that Dave has a mind like a steel trap. All information that goes in there gets crushed and mangled.
Yeah. Very funny.
Okay, so that
Coming
was...
from the person that just quoted his own quote from the first episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you, acting. Thank you. So, anyway, that was Geek Talk Back. Please feel free to post or send us any questions or comments you may have that we can use on our Geek Talk Back segment. Hopefully, next week we are going to be doing a even better subject than this. Basically, is it sci-fi or is it fantasy?
Yes.
That is going to be the subject. Anyway, so
With that,
that's it for tonight's Geek Talk MD.
this is it.
Yeah.
Tonight's the night.
So pack up your lucky dice, put away the Chinese food menus, and we will see you next time.
The price is right.